Greetings. Welcome to the Intergen Podcast here at Hamilton-Madison House. And today we have a guest speaker today. His name is Paul Kurzman. So, Mr. Paul Kurzman, my name is Ray Ramirez, and I am the manager of youth services and intergenerational programs. And so it's an honor to have you here. So let's go around and you introduce yourselves, and then we can start with the interview, all right? Thank you.
Hi, I'm Miranda Garcia. I am currently 17 years old, and I started here like last year, so it's been a year now.
Hello, I'm Aaliyah. I'm 17. I've been here for like a year, almost a half, but yeah.
Hello, my name is Manrou, and I'm 16. I've been here for 2 years.
For 2 years, that's right. Okay, so we could begin by, you start with your first questions. Anyway.
Why did you get involved with HMH?
I got involved, I lived down here, my wife and I, for 16 years. We lived in one of the apartments on Henry and Montgomery Streets that was made available to us by Helen Hall, the executive director of Henry Street Settlement. And we brought up our kids there for 16 years before we moved. And I started out, one of my first jobs when I became a social worker and got my MSW degree, was as a street gang worker, which was a little unusual for me because I'm sort of a very middle-class white guy, and what am I doing in that role? It was an Italian street gang called the Henry Dukes, was creating havoc down here. And they had had two previous workers, one sponsored by 4 of the Protestant churches in the area, and he tried to kind of convert them to active Christians, and believe me, with the Dukes, that ain't gonna work. The next was a worker for the city, what was called the Youth Board at the time, and he was there to break up the gang. And that wasn't gonna work either. And they told him they were gonna kill him if he came back after about a month and a half. So folks in the neighborhood decided they'd give it one more try, and they'd get a professional social worker. And the ink wasn't even dry on my diploma when they hired me. I was looking for a job, Lower East Side looked great, and they would offer my wife and me this apartment at a modest rental right nearby, walking distance, if I would become the worker for the Henry Dukes, which I did. And I actually, somewhat to my surprise, enjoyed the experience. And according to the leaders in the community, including the executive director at the time of Hamilton-Madison House, I was at least modestly successful. By that I mean they neither killed nor maimed anybody during the time I worked with them. And they'd already killed 3 people and maimed 4. Maimed, really seriously injured. Yeah.
And what year was this?
And this was 1964 to 1967.
Wow, okay, wow.
A long time ago. And I loved the work with them, and then a job came open with what was a very famous agency at the time called Mobilization for Youth. Mobilization did most of its work on the northern part of the Lower East Side, north of Delancey and Houston. But they did some work here, and they were ready to hire me. And the Two Bridges Neighborhood Council, which still exists, was at 99 Madison Street here, near Madison and Catherine, needed a staff worker. So I took on both roles, staff worker for Two Bridges Neighborhood Council and supervisor for a couple of projects for the Mobilization for Youth program. And I enjoyed that experience a great deal. I then decided I wanted to do some teaching, so I went back and studied at night for my doctorate and worked part-time at a variety of places, consultant and so forth. But we remained living down here, so I mean, my kids went to preschool at EDGE's, Educational Alliance, like everybody else. I shopped at the same supermarket, bought my bagels and bialys at the same bagel store, and got the nice hot knish from the guy on the corner who was selling them, and lived my life very much as part of this greater Two Bridges community.
Was there ever a person in your lifetime who influenced you the most?
In my whole life,
Yeah.
outside of my parents and family and so forth, I would say that there's somebody you probably haven't heard of, but was very important in the 1930s in helping President Franklin D. Roosevelt get America out of the Great Depression. You probably studied a little of the Great Depression in your required American history course that we all have to take to get our Regents diploma.
Yes.
And that guy's name was Harry Hopkins. He stood at the right hand of President Roosevelt. And he was a social worker from Iowa, of all places, who settled in New York and did remarkable work, was very creative, was willing to take risks and odds. And I read all of his work and was very influenced by meeting one of his kids. He had long since passed. And I would say that he has been a guide light for me that very few people have heard of, but who has meant a lot to me. And then, there were faculty who meant a lot to me. I had some wonderful supervisors, including when I was down here, a woman named Marta Valle. Marta was a Puerto Rican who lived most of her life here, became a social worker herself, went through the same graduate MSW program I did. She hired me. She's very smart, very wise, very deeply embedded in the Puerto Rican community, but also devoted to the city and all of its needs. And she became a commissioner in the city, hired me to be a deputy commissioner under her. And I continued to learn a lot from Marta, who unfortunately died of cancer very early in life, but still was an important person to me.
Thank you for that.
How was it when you started working for Hamilton-Madison House?
I never formally was an employee of Hamilton-Madison House, but I worked at Two Bridges Neighborhood Council. I worked for the Lower East Side Neighborhoods Association, LENA, which doesn't exist any longer, and very, very closely with the executive directors here at Hamilton-Madison House. And when I left those positions in 1967, the board here reached out to me and said, since you won't be an employee in a competing organization in the neighborhood, so to speak, we would like you to come on the board of directors of Hamilton-Madison House. And so I did. And that's now, I've been on the board for 57 years.
Wow.
And I've been president of the board and vice president, all the different responsibilities, as you can imagine, over that period of time. So while not an employee, I would say my relationship with Hamilton-Madison House, both as a board member, as a collaborator with whoever was sitting as its executive director, I played on the basketball court here. I wasn't as good as some of the young kids were, but I was a pretty good defensive. And I went on trips with the seniors, drove a couple of the minivans, took them upstate. So there have been a lot of activities here. And I guess the program at Hamilton-Madison House that I continue to be closest to is the behavioral health, the mental health program. And that's probably because I'm trained as a social worker. I believe that so many of us can benefit from mental health care, and that when you have to deal with the poverty, the racial prejudice, and the conditions of the Lower East Side, being able to see somebody who can help you with your problems is one of the greatest gifts. So I stay very close with Isabel Ching, the current executive director, and especially with Hamilton-Madison House's behavioral health programs.
Thank you.
Why did you enter the field of social work?
Why?
Well, it wasn't my plan. I was an economics major of all things in college. And I liked economics. I did well in economics, and was planning to go and get an MBA, a master's degree in business administration, and go into business. And frankly, make some money.
Period.
Make some money. And applied in my senior year, was accepted at the MBA school I applied to for my degree. But in those days, young men all had a commitment to the military, what was called the draft, compulsory military service. That went out around 1974, but when I graduated from college, you knew that you owed the next 2 or 3 years, unless you had some major disability, which I didn't. You owed it to service. So when I graduated, I was planning to do that after I got my MBA, but I got a notice from my draft board saying that I would be drafted in August. I graduated in June, July, in August. I was on the list. And nothing you can do about that. That's the government. So I contacted the university, and they said, we'll hold your acceptance for up to 3 years. And I went into the military. I decided if I'm going to put in time in the military, I want to be an officer. I don't want to be a private. So I went to officer candidate school, became a lieutenant, this was the 1960s. This was, as you may remember from your history lessons, this was the Vietnam War in the 1960s. After I was injured, I was transferred to non-combat and assigned, of all things, who could have guessed, to be the commanding officer of the Armed Forces Induction Station here on Whitehall Street at the southern end of Manhattan. The building's been torn down since, but it was 39 Whitehall was quite well known. So here I was, all of, 22, 23 years old, just a kid. And suddenly I had responsibility for a great number of men. They were all men in those days. And for some civilians who were federal workers, to process people who were being drafted, just like I was, and some who were being enlisting. And there was then a blockade by the Soviet Union of the city of Berlin in Germany. So they transferred all bilingual officers. My boss was German-American. He came over here as a child, like we'd call a DACA today, but went to college and everything here. but obviously was totally fluent in German as well as American. So he was sent over to Berlin as a bilingual. The next person in line had to go for his annual physical, found he had a heart ailment, so he was made discharged immediately. And then I was promoted up to be the top gun, totally unanticipating it. And, barely old enough to shave. I was so young, 22, 23 years old. What did I know, fresh out of college? But the experience I had there, I saw what the kids of New York were like who were getting drafted. And white and black, Latino, not much Asian in those days, white, black, and Latino, were coming in with tremendous deficits. Many had trouble reading and writing, even some who had high school diplomas, not Regent diploma, but had some kind of diploma. Many had illnesses. We gave them a complete physical exam, including very, very serious illnesses like cancer. But they'd never been to a doctor. Why? Because this was before Medicaid. You've heard of Medicaid, medical insurance for low-income people. That law didn't go into effect until 1965, and I was serving before 1965. And I saw a lot of guys who were already, young as they were, 17, 18, 19, 20, who had long criminal records. We got a printout. We didn't really have computers in the way we have them today, but we could get printouts. And you get 2 or 3 single-space pages of a 19-year-old kid arrested for this, convicted for that, jailed for this. And this was a life I never knew as a white, middle-class, privileged kid who went to a very nice, very fancy kind of high school and very fancy kind of college. I didn't know this world, even though I lived in this world, New York City. I lived in a part of it that was segregated, sort of whites only. And at the end of my period of service, I said to myself, I can't spend my life making money. I broke the news to my parents, who were a little bit upset. I'm the youngest in a large family, and the youngest boy I was supposed to do, be the prize of the family and make money and support them, I guess, in their elder years. But I said, I just can't. I have to work with people. So basically, they loved me enough to say, if that's what you really want, you've thought it through, and we know you've had this powerful experience the past few years down on Whitehall Street as an Army officer processing kids from New York for the draft, we will back you. We won't pay your tuition, but we will support you for your decision. We will never make you feel bad for it, which was quite a gift from my parents. So that's what I did, and I went then to university here in New York to get my MSW degree rather than my MBA degree. That was the first job I had. After that degree, 2-year program, was what I mentioned before, being a street gang worker with the Henry Street Dukes, and then with Mobilization for Youth, Two Bridges Neighborhood Council, Lower East Side Neighborhoods Association, all in the Hamilton-Madison House neighborhood of the lower portion of the Lower East Side, where I became very close and very admiring of Hamilton-Madison House, and played sports with them, met with them, and became very committed to the Lower East Side.
So if you had to go back in time, what would you tell your younger self?
My younger self?
Yes.
To do what your gut tells you to do. My brain was telling me that I'd be crazy. I had already been accepted at a very good MBA program at a fine university. that was a gift not many people would turn down, including myself. But my gut, from my experience here in the Army, of all things, was so powerful. I mean, I'd stay up at night worrying about these kids who were 18 years old and already had 3 convictions. I mean, my God, it's incredible. I worried about the kids who go through our medical program, and the doctors would come up with diagnosis of blood cancer, and they'd tell me the kid would have maybe 1 year to live. We didn't have the cancer drugs then, we have today. Maybe 1 year. The kid didn't know it because he couldn't afford to see a doctor. Kids who had flunked out of school, frankly, because they couldn't see the blackboard, and their parents didn't have the money to take them to an optometrist to pay the optometrist fees and the glasses fees, expensive, okay? And so they were squinting and not getting what the teacher was putting up on the blackboard. Others needed hearing aids. Yeah, in high school they needed hearing aids. And I just said to myself, this is the other part of America that I wasn't born into, that I'd been protected from. Appreciate my parents protected me. But they had enough money. They weren't super wealthy, but they had enough money for all of us kids to give us lots of privileges others didn't have. And my gut told me that I would always have enough money, and whoever I married had to be, or I wouldn't marry them, comfortable with the fact that I wouldn't be as rich as I'm sure other men they would have had an opportunity to marry. Because I'd want them to be beautiful and smart and rich. My wife, now of 59 years,
Wow.
it's a long time to stay with a lady, right?
Yes,
59
sir.
years, she is and has been all those qualities. So I would say follow your gut as I followed my gut. And it didn't take me long that I completely forgot about business school and forgot about how much money I could make, which a lot of my classmates at my college could do nothing when I went to reunions. They could do nothing but talk about who would buy a Lear jet and who would be able to afford a yacht and who would be able to send their kids to all sorts of privileged experiences all over Europe in the summer. Obviously, my kids didn't get to do that, but they did fine. But my gut told me that if you only have one life to live as we live it, that I wanted to do what my gut told me, not what my rational brain or ego or need told me. And I would say that's the most important lesson been for me, and I hope that I pass down to my children.
And I think we have maybe one more question. Go ahead.
What is your best memory from being a professor at Hunter College?
Well, after practicing for 10 years as a social worker, all in New York City, I had by then completed my PhD, so I had the credential that frankly you gotta have to go into academia full time. And I went to Hunter College. They wanted me at one of the privates in New York, but the public sector has always had a special meaning to me. And Hunter, as you may know, is Hunter College of the City University of New York. It's one of the public colleges like Lehman and Queens and Brooklyn and Baruch and so forth. And the dean of the MSW program there, social work program, called me in for lunch. He said, "Do you like tuna fish?" I said, "Sure." "You like your coffee with milk and sugar?" I said, "With milk." "Come on over and have lunch with me." Well, this was the dean of the school and nationally known. And who was I? I was just a kid 10 years out of an MSW program. So, what was I? Early 30s. A nobody, frankly. I had done well, but the dean? Dean Harold Lewis is his name. Wow. So, as they say in the movies, he made me an offer I couldn't refuse. So I went up, and over our tuna fish sandwich, he said, I want you to come and be on the faculty here. He made me a nice offer, not money, but an opportunity to head up and start programs. And that's the kind of thing I like, to start new things, and frankly, to be in charge of them. I don't mind saying I like to be in charge. And so I came to Hunter on the basis of Dean Lewis's invitation and the opportunity. He set out, he kept his word on everything. The man never exaggerated, he never made a promise he wasn't prepared to keep. He's really one of those good guys. And I thought I'd stay there for 8-10 years, go back into practice. I love practice. At the time, one of the agencies on the Lower East Side made me an offer to consider becoming their executive director, one of the competing settlement houses to Hamilton-Madison House. I considered it. But I was liking academia, I liked teaching, I liked doing research, consulting, and I love to write. Most people in academia, where you have to write in order to get tenure, in order to stay and become permanent, do so, oh, terrible, I don't have the time, this is hard. So I've always loved it. Just loved it. Since the days of the electric typewriter to the days of the word processor. I've just loved it. And so this would be an opportunity. You can't really run a settlement house and be writing books as I've done. You just don't have the time, especially, you got wife and kids and all the others, family life in your in your experience. So I stayed in academia, and I stayed, and I liked Dean Lewis's successor when he retired. And the long and short of it is I stayed there on faculty full-time for 49 years until I retired in December of 2022.
Oh, wow.
Recently. 49 years.
Wow.
And served as acting dean for a little while during the time, but mainly as a faculty member. Loved every moment.
And so is there one memory that stands out to you about anything that happened in your teaching career? Something, I'm not even sure, maybe a special student who you taught, or anything that stands out your teaching career at Hunter?
Well, there've been students who've come out and done very special things. One of our students is today the President Biden's chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors.
Okay.
Now, you'd have no reason to know about it, but it's a very prestigious post. And whoever is chairman is a member of the president's cabinet, sits with all the secretaries of and the vice president when they have their, President Biden calls his cabinet meetings. It's that big a job. And he is an MSW, social work graduate of the Hunter College School of Social Work. And is a very special guy, quite modest, self-effacing. He'll be the last guy who will make himself important. He'll talk about all the people who work for him and how good they are, and then he just reflects how good they are and gets the credit for it. So I'd say that is certainly one person. There've been a couple of guys who were with the street gang when I was a street gang worker, one named Sally, who desperately wanted to get into the Army, of all things, but couldn't pass the exam. Now, the passing grade in the Army exam is 34%. Not 70%, not 67%, 34%. Not very high, right? So I tutored him and tutored him and tutored him and tutored him and tutored him. He didn't want the other guys to know and make him look like a sissy. You had to be macho. And he passed the exam, 36%, that's good enough, it's above the 34. And he made the Army, of all things, his career, and he wrote me twice a year for the 20 years that he was in the Army. Another guy wanted to become, remember this is an Italian-American, second-generation Italian-American street gang. And in those days, less today, Italians tended to become sanitation workers. Irish tend to become cops. Things are a little bit better today. But he desperately wanted to become a sanitation worker. For me, lifting those heavy cans and throwing the stuff in the back of a truck is the last thing I'd want to do for 25 years. But it's what he wanted. Pays very well, great benefits, pension, and so forth. Anyway, he couldn't pass the New York City sanitation exam. So I got out the sanitation books. Today, you just download them online, but today you went and you bought the books. And I tutored him. Again, he didn't want anybody to know that I was tutoring him. It would make him look dumb. So we went to a private place, and I tutored him. It's the back of a pool hall over here. I like to play pool, so we'd do a game of pool together, Sally and me, and then we'd do an hour and a half of tutoring in the back. The guy who ran it, Aaliyah, the guy who ran the pool hall, would say, "Hey, Paul, you want to go back in with Sally?" Yeah. We went in his back room, tutored him. And he finally passed the sanitation exam. And he put in 28 years in New York City and became a foreman, a supervisor. You get a lot more money and don't have to lift the cans so much anymore. And that was somebody else, a memory I'm very proud of, and he kept in touch. And when my wife and I were going to a very popular movie on Lexington Avenue, I mean like hot stuff movie, my wife was desperate to go to, and I said, sure, I'd love it, I'm sure. We went, and there was this incredibly long line on Lexington Avenue, and then halfway down 58th Street, right near Bloomingdale's, if you know that department. So we got on the back of it, and then the guy who was sort of the guy who seats you, came along, and he put his arm out about 10 people in front of me and said, "Okay, guys, I've counted the seats for the next show. Anybody behind my line here, you ain't going to get a seat. You might as well go home. All the rest of you in your front, stay here. You should be able to get a seat." Well, my wife was crestfallen. She started to get teary. And I said, I don't know. Let me go up and talk to the guy and see if there's just any chance, if we're waiting to be patient and take the risk, okay, that we could get a seat even if we were back in the corner. So I went up to him and he said, "I know you." He said, "You're a social worker." The guys in the gang never call me by my name. Simple name, Paul, right? Never use my name, ever. They call me social worker. So he said, "I know you." He points right at my chest and says, "You're a social worker, aren't you? You're a social worker." I looked at him, and I have to be honest, I didn't really recognize him, although he looked like some of the guys in it. I said, "You mean from the Lower East Side?" He said, "Yeah, Henry Dukes. You're a social worker, aren't you?" I said, "Yes, I'm a social worker." "Well, you're the best of the best, and you helped us guy," and so forth. I said, "You here alone?" I said, "No, with my wife." She said, "Look, you just come up and you sit by the ticket booth. There's some benches there and so forth and so on. You don't have to do another thing except purchase your tickets like everybody else. I guarantee you'll see the next show. I can't let social worker go home." And I went back to my wife. She wiped her tears. We sat there, got a couple of cherry Cokes, bought the tickets, and so forth. And halfway through moving the line for the next show, he came. His name was Vince. Vince says, "Hey, social worker, you and the lady, you come now. You follow me." And we saw the show. And I said to myself, my God, if I'd gotten an MBA, I would have had to go home. He wouldn't have known who the hell I was.
That is so true. You never know who you impact, right?
You never, ever know.
And it comes back to you. The world is very, very small. So those good deeds come back. Mr. Kurzman, I want to thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your story and your just your happenings in your life with our youth, with our audience. And thank you for your service that you've given to this community and to Hamilton-Madison House. And just thank you for being a teacher. Definitely, thank you.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for being here.